Look, we all know that Frieren is amazing. People talk about it a lot, and for good reason. It's rare that a show comes around with such an utterly unique spin on what has become a tired genre. And how it works isn't complicated. Frieren presents these sort of generic fantasy tropes and just takes them to their logical conclusions. It asks and answers interesting questions. How would an elf's long life affect their perception of the world? What would happen to the hero's party after accomplishing their goal? And why does magic work the way that it does? But among the praise, there have been some rumblings of discontent, mostly regarding Frieren's last arc. I've seen a lot of people say they're disappointed, as the show seems to move away from what made it so good in the first place. And I was one of those people. It just felt like Frieren was beginning to abandon its creative world building in favor of settling into an easy cliche. I mean, exam arcs are a shonen staple, so it felt more like an obligation rather than anything. Before I knew it, I caught myself saying things like, okay, let's get this over with. I couldn't have been more wrong. Now that we've reached the end of the series, I can say that with each passing episode, I grew to regret that initial disdain, until I felt ashamed to have doubted Frieren in the first place. But if you still feel that way, well, I can at least tell you what won me over. You see, Frieren, the elf, not the show, is awesome, yeah. She's a little badass. But this arc is not about her, nor has the show ever really been just about her. It's always been about other people, how they affect her, and how her long life lends itself to carrying others along with her. It's been about how, through her eyes, we can see the world shift and evolve, history develop, and most importantly, how important we are to one another. Frieren's exam arc, in fact, still carries with it every little bit that made the show unique and interesting in the first place, while performing some necessary progression and evolution of those themes. Sousou no Frieren has always been about the impact of human connection. What else could anyone gather from its remarkable prologue other than how utterly affected and changed Frieren is from having known Himmel? But the show is quick to say that the past is the past. While we would do well to remember it fondly, time nonetheless continues to march on. Rather than dwelling on how Himmel left his mark on Frieren, we also need to see how Frieren leaves her mark on the world and those around her. Up until this point, we've been relatively isolated, having only seen a handful of other mages and adventurers. Our antagonists have consisted of mostly monsters and demons, and vampire demons. We lack broader context of the world and how society operates, and we lack context about how quote-unquote typical Frieren, Fern, and Stark are. In order to fully witness that crucial framing, we need our main three to interact with others beyond their close-knit relationship. Cue the exam. Packed in a neat little bow is a way to fully explore exactly what Frieren the Slayer means to other people, as well as let Fern out of her bubble. I mean, she did spend most of her developing years in a literal cabin in the woods. Instead of little villages and modest towns, we reach a huge city, Alverst. Frieren repeatedly says that Fern has talent, and sure, we've seen her accomplish amazing things. But here's a chance to really see for ourselves what exactly that means. This is the setup, and the eventual payoff is magical, but only because this opportunity has been established. From the get-go, we see how quickly value can fade. Frieren is able to take the exam only due to luck. This amulet, once a vaunted honor, reduced to almost nothing. But take note that while its societal value has plummeted, its sentimental value remains strong. Continuing this trend, we get reinforced how fleeting fame can be, and how massive historical figures can seem small despite accomplishing amazing tasks. Few people recognize Frieren, legendary mage of the hero's party who vanquished the Demon King once and for all. Most of the examinees other than Denkin probably never even lived through the Demon King's oppressive reign. We get a good sense that time, once again, has moved us beyond Frieren's relevance. After getting a taste of these new personalities, we get an excuse to split up Frieren and Fern, affording us the opportunity to see how each interacts with unfamiliar and potentially hostile individuals without being able to lean on the other. We get to see just how cautious and observational Frieren is, how she notices that Lavine and Kane are experienced in working together and probably share a deep history of friendship despite all the fighting. In fact, it is through being with the two that she is reminded of her own adventures with Himmel, eventually confirming Himmel's comment about parties almost 80 years later. From here, we get to see how Frieren reacts to being paired with much more inexperienced mages, and having to be the leader, which is poorly. It's a chance for her to show off her knowledge and mentorship skills, and navigate that tricky aspect of social interaction. We also get a sneak peek at the results of her hobby of collecting seemingly random spells, when one comes in remarkably handy for the task at hand, as well as saving Kane from certain danger. The longer Frieren is with Lavine and Kane, the more she finds herself appreciating their vulnerability, and that in turn sets her on a path of remembering Himmel. Frieren, at the end of the day, is about human connection, and how although every relationship is different, they ultimately share the same core concepts and feelings. Sure, Frieren has never been pushed off a cliff and forced to fly on a moment's notice, but she has witnessed Eisen's nervousness be calmed by Himmel's reassurance, based on Himmel just being Himmel. The same way Lavine being Lavine helps Kane's nervousness. This is part of why the exam arc matters. It's Frieren and Fern being forced out of their comfort zones, and that's ultimately how anyone grows as individuals. Speaking of Fern, this is the first time we truly get to see what she's capable of. Just as we see another side of Frieren, we also see how cunning and ruthless Fern can be. Ere is established as the strongest among their group and is supposed to easily mop the floor with her, but she instead gets overwhelmed by basic attack spells. She calls Fern's magic devoid of character, the same description she gave in praise to Werbel's magic moments earlier. Fern lies about killing Ere to Werbel with ease and moves on, having accomplished the task at hand. It is only by exposing Fern to these other characters that we get to see how capable she has grown to be under Frieren's tutelage, and the all-important fact that they're both weird. Everyone else uses these fancy spells, and Richter prattles on about how magic has evolved beyond the use of Zoltrak. Meanwhile, Frieren and Fern have no issues, with the former claiming that it's all that's needed to defeat mages of this era. Frieren's mention of arrows reminds us of her wisdom, but the exam arc also importantly establishes a similarly wise elf by way of Sere. And among the other characters we've been able to compare Frieren and Fern to, Sere is an incredible contrast and bouncing off point for Frieren. They've both been around for ages and they both are exceptional at magic. However, Sere seems to have a tendency for jadedness and cynicism. She constantly seems to be simultaneously in a sour mood while also displaying arrogance and condescension. And if I'm being honest, I can see some tiny slivers of those traits within Frieren herself. So what saves Frieren from heading down that road? Himmel. Because Himmel touched her life so, and not Sere's, we're able to use them as a sort of experiment following the scientific method. Our hypothesis being, if an elf is exposed to humanity, then they will be forever changed, with Sere being the control group. We learn later that there are some confounding variables, but this juxtaposition mostly holds up over the course of the exam arc. We are constantly reminded of Himmel's influence on Frieren, because so many of her actions are tinged by her memory of him. Whether that be the love for exploration, the willingness to cooperate with others, or her acceptance of change. Through Himmel's impact, Frieren is able to show the other mages that strength doesn't come from cynicism or pride. Sere looks down on Frieren for lacking a burning ambition, and yet it is Frieren who brings down the Demon King and easily triumphs over the ruins of the King's tomb, a treacherous dungeon that has taken many lives. And she does this because she's not focused on the ultimate goal of reaching the bottom, but rather the fun of it all, the joy of joy itself. That's what she learned from Himmel. That true experts don't have ulterior motives or self-consciousness. They do what interests them and have faith in their abilities to carry them through. They let themselves get wrapped up in the experience, and aren't afraid to let their passion look like foolishness. Just like how Himmel opened up Frieren's world, the exam arc is where we learn what Frieren means to Fern. As she and Sense look upon a whimsical Frieren, Sense says she doesn't quite understand Fern. We can view her and the other proctors as a sort of stand-in for Sere, representing the magical establishment in her original philosophy. Sense wonders just how one reaches Fern's level despite having no interest or passion in the subject. And yet again, the same theme is reinforced. Just like how Lavine and Kane bring up memories of Eisen and Himmel, Fern now reminisces about Hyder and Frieren, the two most influential people in her life. Becoming a great mage was never the point, honoring Hyder was. And now that he's gone, becoming a first-class mage isn't the point, facilitating Frieren is. The way we live reflects those that are important to us. It just so happens that, along the way, Fern has become a wonderful mage. Just like how, in the middle of living a good life, Himmel ended up saving the world before he knew it. Throughout the exam arc, we can see that the more people we're exposed to, the more we see how integral human connection is to our lives. While Himmel is the one who affected Frieren so much, she and Hyder are the Himmel to Fern. Eisen is the Himmel to Stark. Ubel's sister is her Himmel, all the way down to the grand reveal that Frieren is the Himmel to Himmel himself. When Sari fails her in the third exam, it's partly due to having a silly favorite spell. To Sari, a favorite spell should be based on functionality, complexity, or usefulness. To her, magic is a means to an end. She balks at Frieren's appeal to sentimentality and calls her soft. But it is precisely here that Sari reveals her lack of imagination, and how calcified she's become on her lofty throne. For one being so seemingly wise, she doesn't seem to realize what even human mage Denkin has discovered, that the greatest joy of magic lies in searching for it. Because it's through this searching that connected Frieren to her teacher, Flamme. And it's Flamme's favorite spell that gave Frieren the capability to inspire a scared little boy, to ultimately save the world. It is that so-called useless spell that ends up becoming the most useful, spurring on the events that would lead to the Demon King's demise, not the spell that generates a scientifically accurate black hole or whatever. That is the power of not taking magic for granted. Eventually, we learn that Sari has slowly but surely begun to take this to heart, committing to memory each one of her human students' favorite spells, despite their relative short time with her. It seems like Sari too is not immune from the touch of humanity. Finally, one of the biggest things people point to when they extol Frieren's virtues is the Zoltrak episode, where it is revealed that technology and research has outpaced the effectiveness of what once was a revolutionary new method of attacking, and how now it is easily defended against without a second thought. People say they wish the show could return to that sort of thing rather than this silly exam arc, but the irony is that this arc builds up to that exact same theme once again. Think about it, the Zoltrak episode is ultimately about the ingenuity of humanity. Within a couple of generations, mages were able to research Zoltrak to the extent that it became completely neutered. And in that episode, Frieren uses Fern as the example of how far humanity has progressed, having complete faith in her ability to defend the two of them against the fearsome Quall. You see, both Sari and Frieren recognize the immense potential for humanity. If anything, their long lives are almost seen as detrimental. They are cursed with the luxury of time. Meanwhile, humans constantly feel that sense of urgency spurring them to evolution. Just as Darwin described, it is survival of the fittest, and in a world where you must adapt or die, humans are remarkably adept. Being that we live closer to death, we have to be. I mean, look at our own world. I grew up on the cusp of the internet. I got to see our house get our first desktop on a 56K modem, which evolved into everyone carrying a mini version around in their pockets in the blink of an eye. One of the first moments I realized I had inadvertently acclimated to this new age of technology was showing my dad Halo for the first time. He just couldn't grasp the idea that one of the thumbsticks was to look around and that the other one was to move. It hadn't even occurred to me that something that came so naturally could be such an obstacle. Joysticks and typing are, to me, like magic is to Fern. We've both been steeped in the respective cultures to the point where they're second nature. Fern's immense talent is another reflection of humanity's potential to adapt. In such a short time, Fern is a teenager. She has nonetheless defeated a member of the hero's party and seen through Sari's mana, triumphing over those thousands of years her senior. That is the power of humanity. This is the payoff to the exam arc setup all those episodes ago. I find it incredibly fitting that the big bad antagonist for the exam arc, it's Frieren herself. It drives the point home that Fern is the next stage of evolution, and that this story is far from being about just Frieren. No, on the contrary, she is the boss to be defeated and eventually moved on from. What does it mean to be remembered? Frieren Beyond Journey's End has a clear answer that starts from its prologue, but continues well into its oft-denigrated exam arc. To be remembered is to live on through others. By changing each other's lives, even in the smallest of ways, we preserve our legacy. People dislike the exam arc because it feels like a departure from what we love. But is it really a departure at all? If anything, it serves to reinforce and evolve the concepts brought forth in the first half of the show. About how quickly things change with the times. About the importance of human connection. And about the immense potential humanity holds. Truly, just like how Frieren learns to embrace change, we must also embrace the show's change, and accept letting go. I know that, at least for me, I'm sorry I ever doubted it. Thanks for watching! Truthfully, I have so many things to say about Frieren that I ended up having to split the video, but it feels nice to have too much to say. If you liked the video, please click the like button and subscribe for more content. If you want to support me further, you can donate to my Patreon. Special thanks to Kwaku, George Putter, Theodore Fuzzfeld, Yodoli Moore, and Anime Duck, and Taraloon for their support. And of course, if anything I said was wrong, I'm sorry. I must have stuttered.